My son said, "Hurry up, I'm busy." So I quickly left with my $258,000. The words still echo in my mind like a prayer I never wanted to say. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for even a second, feel that this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It will help me continue sharing these stories that need to be told. I had been folding the same white cotton napkin for the past 10 minutes, my 72-year-old fingers working the fabric into perfect creases that would be undone within hours. The kitchen window above my sink framed the autumn maple tree in my backyard, the same tree where James had built a treehouse 40 years ago, back when his laughter could fill every corner of our Chicago home on Maple Street. The house still smelled like cinnamon and vanilla from the apple pie cooling on my counter. My arthritis screamed with every movement, but I'd made it anyway. James's favorite. Just like I'd made his favorite pot roast, mashed potatoes with real butter, and green beans cooked exactly the way he remembered from childhood. I glanced at the clock above my refrigerator, 2:47 p.m. He was supposed to arrive at 2:30 with Claire and the kids for our monthly Sunday dinner. The table was set with my grandmother's china, the good silverware polished until it gleamed, cloth napkins pressed and waiting. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop. A text from James. "Running late. Kids acting up. Be there soon." No apology. No explanation. Just the expectation that I'd wait, like I always did. My reflection caught my eye in the kitchen window. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the navy blue dress James had complimented once 3 years ago. I'd been wearing variations of the same style ever since, hoping to see that spark of approval in his eyes again. My wedding ring, loose now on my thinning finger, caught the afternoon light streaming through the lace curtains I'd hung when James was still in high school. The house felt too quiet, too big, too full of memories that seemed to mock me now. Family photos lined the mantelpiece in the living room. James's graduation from Northwestern, his wedding day, the grandchildren's school pictures. In every single photo, I stood slightly to the side, smiling, supporting, but never quite the center of anyone's attention. At 3:15, I heard car doors slam in my driveway. My heart jumped the way it always did when James came home, even though this hadn't been his home for 25 years. I smoothed my dress, checked my lipstick in the hallway mirror, and opened the front door before they could ring the bell. James walked up the brick pathway, his phone pressed to his ear, gesticulating wildly as he spoke in the sharp, impatient tone he used for business calls. His hair was graying at the temples now, and his expensive navy suit hung perfectly on his frame, the kind of success I had always dreamed he'd achieve. "No, that's not what I said. The quarterly reports need to be restructured before Monday morning," he barked into the phone, barely glancing at me as he brushed past me into my house. Claire followed behind, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder, scrolling through her own phone. She offered me a quick, distracted smile, the kind reserved for service workers and distant relatives. "Hi, Margaret. Something smells good?" Claire said without looking up from her screen, her manicured nails tapping against the phone case as she typed. 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Michael rushed past me toward the living room, their backpacks hitting the hardwood floor with a thud. No hugs, no "Hi, Grandma." Just the sound of the television turning on and cartoon voices filling the space where conversation should have been. I stood in my own doorway, watching my family settle into my home like temporary visitors at a hotel. James continued his phone conversation in the kitchen, leaning against the counter I'd spent an hour scrubbing that morning. Claire had disappeared into the bathroom, still typing on her phone. "Dinner's ready," I announced to no one in particular, my voice barely carrying over the television and James's continued business discussion. I moved through the motions I'd perfected over decades, transferring the roast to my best serving platter, spooning the mashed potatoes into the bowl my mother had given me as a wedding gift, arranging everything on the dining room table with the careful precision of someone who believed presentation might somehow bridge the growing distance between hearts. James finally ended his call and sat down at the head of the table, his father's old seat, without ceremony. Claire settled beside him, her phone face up next to her plate, its screen lighting up every few seconds with notifications she couldn't ignore. "This looks wonderful, Mom," James said, already cutting into his meat, his attention divided between the food and another text message that had just arrived. The compliment felt hollow, perfunctory, like something he'd learned to say rather than something he felt. I had prepared conversation topics during the week, small attempts to connect with my son's life. I knew he'd been working on a big project at his financial firm. I'd read an article about his company in the Chicago Tribune, saving it to ask him about. James, I saw that piece in the Tribune about your firm landing that new client. You must be— Mom, hold on. He interrupted, his phone already back in his hand. This is important. He answered the call without apologizing, launching into another intense business discussion while his pot roast grew cold on his plate. I sat in my chair, the same chair I'd occupied for 43 years of marriage, through thousands of family dinners, and felt myself becoming invisible. Claire was texting. The children were arguing over what to watch on the living room television. James was deep in conversation about profit margins and client expectations. No one noticed when I stopped eating. No one asked about my week, my health, my life. No one saw the folder I'd been wanting to discuss, sitting on the kitchen counter marked estate planning in my careful handwriting. I'd been meaning to talk to James about the house, about my future, about decisions that felt too big to make alone. I wanted his input, his guidance, his presence in the choices that would shape my remaining years. But watching him now, I realized with crushing clarity that I was simply another item on his agenda, one that rarely made it to the top of his priority list. The dinner plate sat abandoned on my table, congealing gravy forming a skin over the mashed potatoes I had whipped by hand for 20 minutes. James had disappeared into the backyard, still on his phone, pacing the length of my deck while discussing portfolio strategies with someone who commanded more attention than his own mother. I began clearing the table in silence, each clink of china against china a small percussion of disappointment. As I scraped the barely touched food into my garbage disposal, memories flooded back with the force of a dam breaking, years of giving, of sacrificing, of putting James first in every decision I'd ever made. I remembered the night shifts I'd worked at Mercy Hospital, my nursing uniform still damp with sweat and exhaustion, coming home at dawn to pack James's lunch for school. He was 12 then, old enough to make his own sandwich, but I couldn't bear the thought of him eating cafeteria food when I could provide something made with love. My feet would ache from 18 hours on hospital floors, but I'd stand in this same kitchen, cutting the crusts off his peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because he'd mentioned once that he didn't like them. The college tuition alone had cost me everything. Northwestern University, James's dream school, the place that would give him the education he deserved. I had taken out a second mortgage on my house, cashed in my retirement fund early, even sold my mother's antique jewelry collection. Piece by piece, I'd dismantled my own security to build his future. Mom, you don't understand how competitive it is, James had said when I'd suggested the local state school might be more affordable. If I don't go to Northwestern, I'll never get into a good financial firm. This is my future we're talking about. So I'd made it happen. I'd worked double shifts until my supervisor forced me to take breaks because I was falling asleep standing up. I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner while James enjoyed meal plans and social activities I couldn't afford for myself. When other parents visited for Parents' Weekend, I'd stayed home, too embarrassed by my secondhand coat and too exhausted from working extra hours to pay for his textbooks. The graduation ceremony had been worth it, I'd told myself, watching James walk across that stage in his cap and gown. He'd looked so proud, so accomplished, so ready to conquer the world. I'd sat in the bleachers wearing my best dress, the navy one I still wore to our Sunday dinners, and cried tears of joy and exhaustion. Thanks, Mom, he'd said afterward, hugging me briefly before rushing off to celebrate with friends at a restaurant I couldn't afford to join them at. I couldn't have done it without you, but somehow, those words had felt more like a closing statement than a beginning. After his wedding to Claire, a lavish affair I had helped pay for despite Claire's family having significantly more money, the visits became less frequent. Phone calls grew shorter. The requests, however, never stopped. Mom, Claire's pregnant, and we really need help with the down payment on the house, James had said 3 years into their marriage, sitting at this same kitchen table while I calculated whether I could afford to give them another $20,000 from my dwindling savings. I'd given it to them. Of course I had. When Emma was born, I had taken unpaid leave from the hospital to help with childcare for the first 3 months. Claire needed time to adjust to motherhood, and daycare was expensive. I had rocked my granddaughter to sleep in the same chair where I'd once rocked James, singing the same lullabies, feeling the same fierce protective love. But when Claire decided she was ready to return to work, I was dismissed as easily as a temporary employee whose contract had expired. "We've found a wonderful nanny," Claire had announced. "Someone with early childhood education credentials. We really want the best for Emma." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I, with my decades of nursing experience and infinite love, wasn't quite good enough for my own granddaughter. 2 years later, when Michael was born, the pattern repeated. Emergency childcare when the nanny was sick, last-minute babysitting when James and Claire wanted date nights, holiday hosting duties because their house was still being renovated 3 years running. Always needed, never truly wanted. Standing in my kitchen now, I opened the drawer where I kept important papers. Buried beneath insurance documents and old medical records was a manila folder I hadn't looked at in months. Inside were bank statements that told the story of my generosity in black and white. $15,000 for James's first car after college, $25,000 for the wedding, $20,000 for their house down payment, $8,000 for Claire's emergency dental work that turned out to be cosmetic procedures, $12,000 when James's company had temporary cash flow issues and couldn't make payroll on time. Loan after loan, gift after gift, each one presented as urgent, essential, a family emergency that only I could solve. "We'll pay you back, Mom," James always said, "as soon as things stabilize." But things never seemed to stabilize enough for repayment, only for new requests. I traced my finger along the bank statements, calculating the total for the first time in years. Over $200,000 I'd given to James and Claire over the past decade. Money that had come from working extra shifts in my 60s when my knees screamed and my back ached. Money that could have been my security, my comfort, my freedom to retire with dignity. I thought about last Christmas, when I'd given each grandchild $500 in savings bonds, money I'd carefully set aside from my Social Security checks. James had smiled and said, "That's so generous, Mom. They'll really appreciate this when they're older." But later, I'd overheard him on the phone with Claire. "At least it's something we can cash out if we need to. Better than another one of her crocheted blankets." The crocheted blankets I'd made by hand, working on them for months while watching late-night television, my arthritic fingers cramping as I created something beautiful and personal for people who saw my gifts as obligations rather than expressions of love. I closed the folder and walked to the living room, where James was finally off his phone, sitting on my sofa while scrolling through emails. Claire was in the bathroom, presumably still on her own phone. The children were arguing over the remote control, their voices getting louder and more contentious. "James," I said softly, settling into the armchair across from him. "I was hoping we could talk about something important today." He looked up from his phone with the expression of someone interrupted during important work. "What's up, Mom?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. I'd been thinking about downsizing, maybe selling the big house that was becoming harder to maintain. I wanted to discuss my options, maybe ask for his advice on finding a smaller place, perhaps even explore the idea of moving closer to his family. "Well, I've been thinking about the house and whether it makes sense for me to—" "Hold that thought," James interrupted, his phone buzzing with an incoming call. "This might be about the Morrison account. I really need to take this." He answered the phone and walked toward the kitchen, already deep in conversation about profit margins and client meetings. I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the photos and memories of a life spent in service to others, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not my heart. That would imply something clean and sharp. This was messier, rawer, like old wood splintering under too much weight. Claire emerged from the bathroom, finally putting her phone in her purse. "The kids and I should probably head home soon," she announced to no one in particular. "Emma has soccer practice in the morning, and Michael has that project due." I nodded, understanding that my Sunday dinner, the one I'd spent hours preparing, the one that had cost me a week's worth of grocery money to make special, was already over in everyone's mind but my own. "Of course," I said quietly. "Let me wrap up some leftovers for you to take home, because that's what mothers do. even when their hearts are breaking, even when they're invisible, even when they finally started to wonder, was I used? The leftover containers sat lined up on my counter like soldiers, perfectly portioned meals that would feed James's family for 3 days. I'd included extra dinner rolls, knowing Michael loved them, and made sure to pack the remaining pie separately so it wouldn't get soggy. Even in my hurt, I couldn't stop myself from caring. James wandered back into my kitchen, finally off his call, checking his Rolex with the impatient gesture of someone who had more important places to be. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. We should probably get going. Claire wants to stop by Whole Foods before they close." He grabbed the containers without looking at me, balancing them against his chest while scrolling through his phone with his free hand. No mention of the hours I'd spent cooking. No acknowledgement of the care that had gone into every dish. Just the casual assumption that my effort was his right. "James," I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper, "about what I wanted to discuss. Can we talk about it next week?" he said, already heading toward my front door. "I've got the Henderson merger tomorrow, and then Claire's parents are coming for dinner Tuesday. It's just crazy right now. Next week. Always next week." The same response I'd been hearing for months whenever I tried to have a real conversation with my son. I followed him to my foyer, where Claire was already gathering the children's backpacks with military efficiency. Emma and Michael were arguing over who got to sit in the front seat, their voices echoing off the hardwood floors that I had spent my Saturday morning polishing. "Say goodbye to Grandma," Claire instructed absent-mindedly, her attention already shifting to the grocery list on her phone. Emma gave me a quick hug around the waist before running toward the car. Michael waved from the doorway without turning around. These children I'd helped raise, whose first steps I'd witnessed, whose tears I'd dried countless times, they treated me like a distant relative they saw at obligatory family gatherings. "Thanks again, Mom," James called over his shoulder as he loaded the food into his Mercedes SUV. "I'll call you this week." I stood in my doorway, watching my family drive away without looking back. The red taillights disappeared around the corner of Maple Street, and suddenly my house felt cavernous. The silence was deafening, not the peaceful quiet of solitude, but the hollow emptiness of abandonment. I spent the next hour washing dishes with mechanical precision, each plate and glass cleaned and dried, and returned to its designated place. My kitchen looked perfect again, as if the dinner had never happened, as if my family had never been there at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my house, looking at family photos with new eyes. In every picture, I noticed the pattern I'd been blind to for years. James's arm around Claire at their anniversary party, both of them looking toward something beyond the camera, me standing slightly behind them, smiling, but clearly an afterthought in the composition. The grandchildren's school plays, where I sat alone in the auditorium while James and Claire worked their phones between acts. Birthday parties where I was relegated to kitchen duty, while the real guests enjoyed themselves in my living room. Family vacations I wasn't invited to because there wasn't enough room in their rental house, but somehow space materialized for Claire's sister and her 3 children. By Tuesday morning, I had made a decision. I would try one more time to connect with James, to have the conversation about my future that felt increasingly urgent. I called his office, something I rarely did because he'd made it clear that work calls were for emergencies only. "Henderson Financial, this is James speaking," his professional voice answered after 4 rings. "James, it's Mom. I know you're busy, but I really need to talk to you about something important." A pause. Then the sound of typing in the background. "Mom, can this wait? I'm in the middle of preparing for a client presentation." "It's about the house," I pressed on, my heart pounding. "I've been thinking about selling it, and I need your advice about where I should—" "Mom, seriously, I can't do this right now. Can you call me tonight? Better yet, just email me the details and I'll look at them when I have time." Email. He wanted me to email him about the most important decision of my remaining years. "James, I just need 20 minutes. Maybe we could meet for coffee this week. Look, I've got to go. The clients are here. We'll talk soon, okay?" The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an accusation. I'd raised this man, sacrificed everything for his success, and now I couldn't even get 20 minutes of his time to discuss my future. That afternoon, Driven by a desperation I didn't fully understand, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to James's office building in downtown Chicago, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that represented everything he'd achieved with my help. I didn't have an appointment. I just needed to see him, to have a real conversation, face to face, without phones or distractions or excuses. The receptionist was polite but firm. "Mr. Henderson is in meetings all afternoon. If you'd like to schedule an appointment, I can check his calendar for next month." Next month, for his own mother. I sat in the marble lobby for 2 hours, watching young professionals stride past with purpose and confidence. At 4:30, I saw James emerge from the elevator, laughing with 2 colleagues as they headed toward the exit. He was animated, engaged, fully present in a way I hadn't seen him in years. "James," I called out, standing from the uncomfortable modern chair where I'd been waiting. He turned, and for a moment his face showed genuine surprise. Then something else. Embarrassment? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. "Mom? What are you doing here?" His colleagues paused, looking between us with polite curiosity. I felt suddenly aware of my appearance, my sensible shoes, my aging coat, my gray hair that marked me as someone from a different generation, a different world. "I just wanted to talk to you," I said softly, "about the house situation. I thought maybe—" "This really isn't a good time," James interrupted, glancing at his colleagues with an apologetic smile. "Why don't you call me later tonight and we'll set something up?" He gave me a perfunctory hug, the kind reserved for acquaintances, and continued toward the door with his colleagues. I heard one of them ask, "Everything okay?" And James's response as they walked away, "Yeah, just my mom. She gets confused sometimes about boundaries." Confused about boundaries. As if wanting to speak with my son was some kind of social error that revealed my declining mental state. I drove home in a daze, James's words echoing in my mind. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My front door was slightly ajar, though I was certain I'd locked it before leaving. Inside, I found James in my home office, sitting at my desk with papers spread before him. My papers. My private documents. "James? What are you doing here? How did you get in?" He looked up with the casual air of someone who'd been caught doing something mildly inappropriate, but not really wrong. "I still have my key, remember? I thought I'd take a look at those house documents you mentioned, since you seemed so concerned about them." My blood turned cold. Spread across my desk were my most private financial documents. Bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies, the house appraisal I'd been keeping in my locked filing cabinet. "These are my private papers," I said, my voice shaking. "You had no right—" "Mom, relax. I'm trying to help you here." James picked up the house appraisal, whistling softly. $1.7 million. I had no idea property values in this neighborhood had gone up so much. He was calculating. I could see it in his eyes, the same look he got when he was analyzing investment opportunities for his clients. My home, my security, my life, it was all just numbers on a spreadsheet to him. "Put those down," I said, reaching for the papers. James held them away from me, still studying the documents with professional interest. "Mom, we need to talk about this seriously. You're sitting on a fortune here, and you're living like you're poor. This house is way too big for you. The maintenance costs alone must be killing you." "I can manage my own affairs," I said, my voice growing stronger despite my trembling hands. "Can you, though?" James asked, and there was something cruel in his tone now, something that cut deeper than his usual dismissiveness. "I mean, you called me 3 times this week about the same conversation. You showed up at my office like some confused old woman. Maybe it's time to admit you need help making these kinds of decisions." Confused old woman. The words hit me like physical blows. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help you here. If you sell this place and downsize, you could live comfortably for the rest of your life. Hell, you could probably help us out with the kids' college funds while you're at it." There it was. The real reason for his sudden interest in my finances. I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I'd hoped never to open in front of anyone else. Inside were copies of every loan, every gift, every financial transaction between us over the past decade. At the bottom was a letter from an attorney I'd consulted months ago, a legal opinion about my son's financial obligations to me. But there was something else in that folder, something that made my hands shake as I pulled it out. A credit report. My credit report, which I'd requested after noticing some irregularities in my bank statements. There, in black and white, was a loan I'd never taken, a loan against my house, a loan that James had somehow secured using my property as collateral. "What is this?" I whispered, holding the document toward him. James's face went pale. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely afraid. "Mom, I can explain," but I wasn't listening anymore. The numbers on the page swam before my eyes as the full scope of his betrayal became clear. He hadn't just taken my money over the years. He'd taken my future. He'd mortgaged my home without my knowledge, using my death as collateral for his own financial gain. The room tilted around me, and I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. This wasn't just neglect or casual cruelty. This was theft. This was the systematic destruction of everything I'd worked for, perpetrated by the person I'd loved most in the world. "Get out," I whispered. "Mom, let me explain. It's not what you think. Get out." The words erupted from me with a force that surprised us both. James gathered the papers hastily, his hands shaking as he tried to stuff them back into folders. "We'll talk when you're calmer," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The magnitude of what I'd discovered had stolen my ability to speak, to think, to do anything but stand there and absorb the reality that my own son had been systematically destroying my life for years. After he left, I sat alone at my desk, staring at the evidence of his betrayal. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows of the house that might not even belong to me anymore, and for the first time in my 72 years, I began to plan my own revolution. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn. The fraudulent loan documents spread before me like evidence at a crime scene. The numbers told a story I'd been too trusting to see. James had been systematically planning to inherit my wealth long before I was ready to leave it behind. At 6 a.m., I called my attorney, Harold Brennan, a man who'd handled my husband's estate and had been gently suggesting for years that I update my own will. His voice was groggy with sleep, but he became instantly alert when I explained what I'd discovered. "Margaret, this is serious. If what you're telling me is accurate, your son may have committed fraud. We need to meet immediately." By 9 a.m., I was sitting in Harold's downtown office, watching him review the documents with the grim expression of someone who'd seen family greed destroy lives before. "He forged your signature on the loan application," Harold said, pointing to a signature that looked like mine but contained subtle differences only an expert would notice. "And he listed himself as your power of attorney, which according to your actual documents, he is not." I felt nauseous. What does this mean for my house? It means we're going to fight this and we're going to win. But first, we need to protect your assets immediately. I'm recommending we freeze all your accounts, change all your passwords, and file a fraud report with both the bank and the police. The police. My own son's crimes would now involve the police. That afternoon, while I was at the bank reversing years of financial vulnerabilities James had created, my phone began ringing incessantly. First James, then Claire, then James again. I let every call go to voicemail, each message more desperate than the last. "Mom, we need to talk about this misunderstanding. Call me back immediately. Margaret, it's Claire." James explained what happened, and I think there's been some confusion. We should all sit down together and work this out. "Mom, you're overreacting. I was trying to help you plan for your future. You can't just cut off communication like this." But I wasn't cutting off communication. I was protecting myself for the first time in decades. The next morning, James appeared at my front door at 7 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Through my peephole, I could see dark circles under his eyes and a wild desperation I'd never witnessed before. "Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to fix this." I stood on the other side of my door, my hand on the deadbolt I'd had changed the previous evening. For the first time in my adult life, I felt unsafe in my own home because of my own child. "I'm not going anywhere until you talk to me," James shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "This is ridiculous. I'm your son." Mrs. Patterson from next door came out to retrieve her newspaper, casting concerned glances toward my porch. The Hendersons had always been such a quiet, respectable family. Now, James was creating a scene that would have the whole neighborhood talking. My phone rang. Claire's number. "Margaret, you need to let James in. He's been up all night and he's making himself sick over this misunderstanding. The children are asking where Grandma is and why Daddy is so upset." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "Your husband stole from me. That's a terrible thing to say about your own son. James would never. He loves you. We all love you. Your family. Family. The word that had been used to manipulate me for so many years. If he loves me, why did he forge my signature on legal documents?" A pause. Then Claire's voice, sharper now. "I don't know what you think you saw, but James is a successful financial advisor. He knows about these things better than you do. Maybe you should trust his judgment instead of jumping to conclusions." Trust his judgment. The same judgment that had convinced me to hand over $200,000 over the years. The same judgment that had led him to mortgage my future without my consent. "I'm hanging up now, Claire." "Wait, Margaret. If you're angry about money, we can work something out. We can set up a payment plan for whatever you think we owe you, but you can't destroy this family over a misunderstanding." Payment plan. As if decades of financial abuse could be resolved with monthly installments. That evening, Emma called. Sweet, 8-year-old Emma, whose voice was carefully coached and whose words were clearly not her own. "Grandma, Daddy says you're mad at us. Did we do something wrong? Mommy says you might not want to see us anymore." My heart shattered. Using the children as emotional weapons was a new low, even for James and Claire. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Grandma loves you very much. Then why won't you come to my soccer game on Saturday? Daddy says you might be too mad to come watch me play." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar manipulation tightening around me like a noose. This was how it always worked. Any boundary I tried to set was twisted into me being the one who was hurting the family, being unreasonable, being cruel to innocent children. "Grandma will try her best to be there," I found myself saying, the words escaping before I could stop them. "Yay! I'll tell Daddy you're not mad anymore." After Emma hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since discovering James's betrayal. Not tears of sadness, but tears of rage at how easily I'd been manipulated, how quickly I'd almost surrendered my boundaries to protect everyone's feelings except my own. The next day, James showed up with both children in tow, using them as human shields against my anger. Through my living room window, I watched him coaching them on my front walkway, pointing toward my door and whispering instructions. Michael knocked first, his 10-year-old voice artificially cheerful. "Grandma, we brought you flowers. Daddy helped us pick them out." Then Emma, "We made you a card. It says we're sorry you're sad." I opened my door because seeing my grandchildren always weakened my resolve, and James knew it. The children rushed to hug me, their small arms wrapping around my waist with genuine affection that had nothing to do with the adult drama swirling around them. James followed them inside, his face a mask of wounded sincerity. "Mom, I know you're upset, and I want to make this right, but punishing the kids isn't fair. They love you, and you're scaring them." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, accepting the crayon-drawn card from Emma while keeping my distance from James. "I'm protecting myself from your own family. Mom, I know I made some mistakes with the paperwork, but my intentions were good. I was trying to help secure your future." Mistakes? Paperwork? As if fraud was a simple filing error. Claire appeared in my doorway, perfectly dressed as always, carrying a coffee tray and wearing the smile she reserved for difficult clients. "I brought your favorite, that vanilla latte from the cafe on Lincoln Avenue. I thought we could all sit down and have a civilized conversation." They were surrounding me, using every emotional weapon in their arsenal. The children's love, James's wounded son act, Claire's false friendship, the promise of normal family gatherings if I would just stop being difficult. "Kids," James said gently, "why don't you go play in my backyard while the adults talk?" Emma and Michael ran off, their laughter echoing through my house that had once been filled with such sounds regularly. I watched them go, remembering when I'd been the safe adult in their lives, the one they ran to for comfort and cookies and unconditional love. Once the children were outside, James's demeanor shifted completely. The wounded son disappeared, replaced by the calculating businessman who saw every interaction as a negotiation. "Mom, let's be practical here. You can't live in this house forever. You're 72 years old. What happens when you can't climb the stairs anymore? What happens when you need medical care? Do you really want to end up in some state-run nursing home because you were too stubborn to let your family help you plan ahead?" State-run nursing home. The threat was subtle but clear. Claire jumped in with practiced timing. "We've been looking at some lovely assisted living communities. Places where you could have your own apartment but also have help when you need it. The social activities alone would be so good for you. You've seemed so isolated lately." Isolated. Because they'd systematically reduced my role in their lives to emergency babysitter and financial resource. "And honestly," James continued, "the money from selling this house could set up a nice trust fund for the kids' college education. Emma's already showing such promise in school. It would be a shame if she couldn't pursue her dreams because we didn't plan ahead." There it was. The implication that refusing to give up my home would somehow rob my grandchildren of their futures. The same manipulation that had worked for decades, repackaged for a new crisis. I looked at my son and daughter-in-law sitting in my living room, in the chairs I'd bought with money I'd earned through night shifts and double overtime, making plans for my life and my death with the casual confidence of people who'd never been told no. And suddenly, something crystallized inside me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. "I want you both to leave," I said quietly. "Mom," James started. No more talking. No more explanations. No more manipulation." My voice grew stronger with each word. "You forged my signature. You stole from me. You treated me like a bank account with legs for years, and now you're upset that I've finally noticed." "That's not fair," Claire protested. "We've always included you in everything." "Included me?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I was kitchen help at family gatherings. I was free babysitting when convenient. I was an ATM when you needed money, but I was never actually part of this family's decisions or future. James's mask slipped completely now, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Fine. You want to be a bitter old woman? Go ahead. But don't come crying to us when you're sitting alone in this empty house, too proud to admit you need help." I walked to my front door and opened it. "Get out, and take your children with you." For a moment, James looked genuinely shocked. In 48 years of life, his mother had never spoken to him this way. But as he gathered the children and headed for the door, I heard Claire whisper to him, "Don't worry. She'll come around. She always does. She needs us more than we need her." Standing in my doorway, watching my family drive away in their expensive car, I realized that Claire was wrong. For the first time in decades, I needed them less than they needed me, and that terrified them. The silence in my house that first week felt different. Not the hollow emptiness of abandonment I'd grown accustomed to, but something else entirely, the quiet of possibility. For the first time in decades, my phone wasn't ringing with requests for babysitting, financial emergencies, or family obligations that always seemed to fall on my shoulders. I woke up on Thursday morning at 9 a.m., a luxury I hadn't allowed myself since my nursing days when my schedule was dictated by shift rotations and other people's needs. The autumn sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains, warm and golden, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations. I made coffee. Real coffee, not the instant kind I'd been buying to save money for James's various emergencies. I sat at my kitchen table with the Chicago Tribune spread before me, reading every section instead of just skimming the headlines before rushing off to handle someone else's crisis. The obituaries caught my attention, as they often did for people my age. But today, instead of the usual melancholy, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of making my own choices. My doorbell rang at 10:30. I peered through the peephole to find my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, holding a covered casserole dish and wearing an expression of genuine concern. "Margaret, dear, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I couldn't help but notice the commotion the other day, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." Eleanor Patterson was 75, a widow who'd lived next door for 8 years. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence and borrowed cups of sugar from each other, but I had never had time for real friendship. There was always something James needed, some family obligation that took precedence over my own social connections. "Come in, Eleanor." "That's very kind of you." Eleanor stepped into my kitchen and immediately noticed what I myself was just beginning to see: how beautiful my home actually was when it wasn't just a staging area for other people's visits. "I've always admired your kitchen," Eleanor said, setting the casserole on my counter. "The way the morning light comes through that window is just lovely. And these copper pots, are they antiques?" I looked at my kitchen with fresh eyes. The copper pots had been my mother's, bought one piece at a time during the Depression when every purchase was carefully considered. The butcher block island in the center was something my late husband and I had saved for over 2 years to buy. The herb garden visible through my window was my creation, tended through seasons of careful attention. "They were my mother's," I said, running my fingers along the worn copper surface. "I haven't really looked at them in years. Sometimes we stop seeing the beauty around us when we're too busy taking care of everyone else," Eleanor said gently. We sat together drinking coffee and eating Eleanor's homemade banana bread. The first time I had been served food in my own home in longer than I could remember. Eleanor told me about her book club, her watercolor painting class, her volunteer work at the animal shelter. "I had no idea you were so busy," I said, genuinely amazed. "Your life sounds wonderful." "It is now," Eleanor smiled. "But it wasn't always. After Robert died, I spent 3 years doing nothing but grieving and letting my children manage every aspect of my life. They meant well, but they were so worried about me being alone that they scheduled every minute of my day. I felt like a child again, constantly supervised." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. "What changed?" I realized that being alone and being lonely are two very different things. I was lonelier living according to everyone else's schedule than I am now living according to my own. That afternoon, after Eleanor left with promises to introduce me to her book club, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I called in sick to my own life. I unplugged my landline. I turned off my cell phone. I locked my doors and spent the entire afternoon doing absolutely nothing productive. I took a bath, a real bath with bubbles and candles, not the hurried showers I'd been taking for years to save time for more important things. I read 3 chapters of a novel I'd started 6 months ago, but never had time to finish. I napped on my living room sofa without setting an alarm. When I woke up at sunset, I felt more rested than I had in years. That evening, I ordered Chinese takeout, something I'd always considered an unnecessary expense when I could cook more economically at home. When the delivery driver arrived, a young man named David with kind eyes and a warm smile, I found myself inviting him to stay for tea. "I don't usually do this," David said, accepting my offer with surprise. "But you remind me of my grandmother. She always said the best conversations happen over unexpected cups of tea." David was 26, working his way through graduate school in social work, helping pay for his education by delivering food in the evenings. He told me about his studies, his dreams of opening a community center for elderly people who needed more social connection. "The isolation is the worst part," he explained, accepting a second cup of my Earl Grey. "Not the physical limitations or even the financial struggles. It's feeling invisible, like society has decided your useful life is over." Invisible. The word resonated through my chest like a struck bell. "I think I've been invisible for a long time," I admitted, "but I'm only just now realizing it." The next morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I went shopping for myself, not groceries for family dinners or gifts for grandchildren's birthdays, but actual shopping for my own pleasure. At Nordstrom, I tried on clothes in colors I'd forgotten I liked, a soft lavender sweater that brought out the silver in my hair, a pair of well-fitting jeans that made me feel contemporary instead of elderly, a silk scarf in shades of blue that reminded me of Lake Michigan on summer mornings. The sales associate, a woman named Carmen who was perhaps 45, treated me with genuine respect and attention. "That color is absolutely stunning on you," Carmen said, adjusting the scarf around my shoulders. "You have such beautiful bone structure. This style is perfect." When was the last time someone had complimented my appearance? I couldn't remember. I bought the sweater, the jeans, and the scarf, spending money on myself without calculating whether I could afford it, without wondering if the money would be better saved for James's next emergency. At the cosmetics counter, I allowed myself to be pampered with a makeover, something I'd always thought was frivolous and vain. But watching my reflection transform under the gentle hands of the makeup artist, I saw something I'd forgotten existed: my own beauty. "You have gorgeous eyes," the artist said, applying mascara with careful precision. "This silver eyeshadow makes them look like starlight." I stared at myself in the mirror and saw not the tired, invisible woman I'd become, but glimpses of the person I'd been before I'd defined myself entirely through service to others. That evening, I called Harold Brennan with a decision that surprised even me. "I want to sell the house," I told my attorney. "Not because James wants me to, but because I want to. I want to live somewhere smaller, somewhere chosen for me instead of for family obligations." "Are you sure about this, Margaret? It's a big decision." "I'm sure. For the first time in years, I'm completely sure about something." Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. My 8-year-old granddaughter, Emma, riding her bicycle in my driveway, apparently unsupervised. I opened my door to find Emma sitting on my front steps, her small face serious with the weight of a mission she'd assigned herself. "Grandma, I came to ask you something important." "Where are your parents, sweetheart?" "Daddy thinks I'm at soccer practice, but I told Coach Mike I had a stomach ache. I rode my bike here because I need to know something." Emma's directness reminded me of myself at that age, before I'd learned to make myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. "What do you need to know? Are you really mad at us forever? Because Mommy says you are, but Daddy says you'll get over it. And I don't understand why everyone is sad all the time now." I knelt down to Emma's eye level, my heart breaking for this innocent child caught in the middle of adult dysfunction. "I'm not mad at you, Emma. I could never be mad at you or your brother. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why can't things go back to normal? Why can't we have Sunday dinners anymore?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I owed this child honesty, even if the adults in her life weren't capable of it. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people need to make changes to be happy and healthy. That doesn't mean they stop loving each other. It just means they need to love each other differently." Emma considered this with the seriousness of a small person trying to understand a complicated world. "Are you happier now, Grandma?" The question surprised me with its perceptiveness. I thought about the past week. The quiet mornings, the new clothes, the freedom to make choices without considering everyone else's needs first. "Yes," I said honestly. "I think I am." "Then I guess that's good," Emma said, though she still looked confused. "Daddy says you're being selfish, but you don't seem selfish. You seem lighter." From the mouth of a child came wisdom that adults had missed entirely. "Will you still love me if I stay lighter?" I asked. Emma threw her small arms around my neck with fierce affection. "I'll love you no matter what, Grandma. Even if you're different now. Maybe especially if you're different now." After Emma left, I insisted on calling James to let him know where his daughter was, a conversation that involved significant shouting on his end. I stood in my driveway and looked at my house with new eyes. This beautiful home that had sheltered 3 generations of my family would make someone else happy, and I would take the proceeds and build a new life, a life chosen deliberately, a life designed for joy instead of obligation. For the first time in decades, I was excited about my future, and I was going to claim it with both hands. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday morning, planted in my front lawn like a declaration of independence. I watched from my kitchen window as the real estate agent, a competent woman named Sarah Chen, positioned it perfectly between the maple tree and the rose bushes I'd tended for 20 years. Within 3 hours, my phone was ringing. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" James's voice exploded through the receiver before I could even say hello. "I just drove by the house and saw a for sale sign in the yard." "Have you completely lost your mind?" I held the phone away from my ear, his shouting distorted by rage and panic. When he paused for breath, I spoke calmly. "I'm selling my house, James. I don't need your permission." "Like hell you don't. This is a family decision. This house has been in our family for 23 years. You can't just—" "It's my house," I interrupted. my voice steady. My name is on the deed. My decision to make. We need to meet. Right now. This is insane. No. The single word hung in the air like a slammed door. In 48 years of being James's mother, I had never simply said no to a demand for my immediate attention. No? James sputtered. What do you mean, no? I mean, I don't want to meet with you right now. I'm busy. It was true. I was busy. Busy reading the real estate contract. Busy planning my new life. Busy learning what it felt like to prioritize my own needs. But more than that, I was busy being someone who said no when I meant no. Busy doing what? You don't have a job. You don't have any responsibilities except… I hung up the phone. For 30 seconds, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, my heart pounding with the audacity of what I'd just done. Then I smiled. Actually smiled, for the first time since this whole nightmare began. By Thursday evening, I had received 17 phone calls, 12 text messages, and 6 voicemails from various family members. Claire tried gentle manipulation. Margaret, we're just worried about you making such a big decision so quickly. James alternated between rage and false contrition. Mom, I know I made mistakes, but you're punishing the whole family for something we can work through. Even James's mother-in-law, Patricia, whom I barely knew, called to express concern about rash decisions made in emotional states. I listened to none of the voicemails completely. I'd heard variations of these same manipulative themes for years. Friday brought a new escalation, a family meeting request. Not a demand this time, but a formal written invitation delivered by courier to my front door. Margaret, the letter began in Claire's precise handwriting, we're requesting a family meeting to discuss the house situation and clear up the misunderstandings that have created tension between us. We love you and want to work together to find a solution that makes everyone happy. We'll be at your house Sunday at 2 p.m. to talk this through like the loving family we are. The presumption was breathtaking. They'd scheduled a meeting at my house, announced their arrival time, and framed their manipulation as love. They were coming whether I agreed or not. I spent Saturday preparing, but not in the way they expected. I called Harold Brennan and asked him to be present during the meeting. I gathered all documentation of James's financial fraud, organizing it in neat folders. I prepared a statement, not emotional, not accusatory, but clear and final. Most importantly, I called Sarah Chen and accepted the offer that had come in Friday evening. Full asking price, cash deal, closing in 2 weeks. Sunday at 1:45 p.m., I watched from my living room window as 3 cars pulled into my driveway. James and Claire arrived first, their faces grim with determination. Patricia, Claire's mother, emerged from the second car, wearing the expression of someone prepared to mediate a dispute among lesser beings. The third car contained James's younger brother Mark and his wife Jennifer, flying in from Minneapolis specifically for this intervention. They'd mobilized the entire extended family to pressure one 72-year-old woman into submission. Harold Brennan arrived at exactly 2 p.m., his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from family confrontation to legal proceeding. I introduced him simply as my attorney, watching the color drain from James's face as the implications sank in. We gathered in my living room, the space suddenly feeling too small for so much tension and hostility. James positioned himself in the chair that used to be his father's, a power play I didn't miss. Claire sat beside him, her tablet ready to take notes like this was a business negotiation. The others arranged themselves strategically around the room. I sat across from them, Harold beside me, feeling oddly calm in the midst of their barely contained panic. "Mom?" James began, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and concerned. "We're here because we love you, and we're worried about the decisions you're making. Selling the house is a huge step that affects all of us, and we think you're acting emotionally instead of rationally. The house sold yesterday," I said quietly. The room erupted. "What?" James shot to his feet, his careful composure shattering completely. You didn't. This is cash offer, full asking price, closing in 2 weeks," I continued calmly. "I'll be moving to a condominium in Lincoln Park that I purchased yesterday afternoon." Claire's face went white. "Margaret, you can't make decisions this big without consulting the family. We should have been involved in choosing where you live. Why?" The simple question seemed to stump her. Claire looked to James for support, but he was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "Because we're your family," Patricia finally exploded. "Because we care about your welfare." I opened the folder Harold had prepared and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is a financial analysis of my relationship with James over the past 10 years. Would you like me to read it aloud?" "Mom, don't," James started. $215,000 in loans and gifts that were never repaid, I read steadily. One fraudulent loan against my property without my knowledge or consent. Multiple instances of financial manipulation and emotional coercion. Mark, who'd been silent until now, looked shocked. "James, what is she talking about?" "It's complicated," James said quickly. "There are misunderstandings." "There are no misunderstandings," Harold interjected, his voice carrying the authority of legal documentation. "There are crimes, fraud, forgery, and financial elder abuse." The word crimes hit the room like a physical blow. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice sharp with new understanding. "James, did you steal from your mother?" "I didn't steal anything. I was trying to help her plan for the future. She's 72 years old. She needed professional guidance." "Professional guidance that involved forging her signature?" Harold asked mildly. I watched my family's dynamics shift in real time. Mark and Jennifer were looking at James with growing horror. Patricia was calculating how this scandal might affect her own family's reputation. Claire was still trying to control the narrative. "Even if there were some financial irregularities," Claire said desperately, "that doesn't mean Margaret should isolate herself from her family. We can work through this together." "I'm not isolating myself," I said. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." James stopped pacing and turned to face me directly, his mask of reasonableness finally falling away completely. "Fine," he snarled. "You want to be a bitter old woman living alone in some sterile condo? Go ahead. But don't expect us to come running when you're lonely and scared and realize you need your family." The threat was clear. Comply with our demands or lose access to your grandchildren. I stood up slowly, walked to my mantelpiece, and picked up a framed photo. A family portrait from last Christmas where I stood slightly behind everyone else, smiling but clearly peripheral to the group. I looked at it for a long moment, then set it face down on my coffee table. "I need to tell you all something," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "For 20 years I've been buying your love with money, time, and sacrifices. I convinced myself that if I just gave enough, did enough, suffered enough in silence, you would finally see me as more than just a resource to exploit." I turned to face James directly. "But you never saw me at all, did you? You saw a bank account. You saw free childcare. You saw someone so desperate for family connection that she'd accept any treatment, as long as you kept showing up." James opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm done," I said simply. "I'm done buying love that was never really for sale. I'm done accepting crumbs and calling it a feast. I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger." I walked to my front door and opened it. "This meeting is over. My decision is final. Anyone who wants a relationship with me based on mutual respect and genuine affection knows where to find me. Anyone who just wants access to my money and services can leave now and not come back." The room sat in stunned silence for 30 seconds. Then James stormed toward the door, his face red with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed as he passed me. "When you're sitting alone in that condo with no family, no grandchildren, no one who cares about you, you'll remember this moment." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time the man he'd become. Entitled, cruel, incapable of love that didn't serve his own interests. "I won't regret choosing my own dignity," I said quietly. "But I think you might regret losing me." One by one, they filed out. Claire tried one last manipulation at the door. "Margaret, think about what you're doing to Emma and Michael. They love you, and I love them," I replied. "Which is why I'm not going to teach them that love means accepting abuse." After they were gone, Harold and I sat in my living room, surrounded by the echoes of years of accumulated hurt finally given voice. "How do you feel?" Harold asked gently. I considered the question seriously. I felt empty, but not hollow. Sad, but not defeated. Free, but not reckless. "I feel like myself again," I said finally. "For the first time in 20 years, I feel like myself." Outside, autumn was turning to winter, and I was finally ready to start living. The Lincoln Park condominium was nothing like my house on Maple Street, where my old home had been filled with 40 years of accumulated memories, some beautiful, many painful. This space was clean, modern, and entirely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced east toward Lake Michigan, flooding the open-plan living area with morning light that seemed to promise new beginnings with every sunrise. I stood in my empty living room on moving day, holding a cup of coffee and watching the sun paint silver paths across the lake's surface. For the first time in decades, I wasn't calculating how much this moment of peace was costing me in terms of obligations to others. I was simply present, simply grateful, simply free. The movers had finished unpacking my carefully curated possessions. Only the things that brought me joy or served my current life. The rest I'd donated to charity, watching truck after truck carry away the accumulated debris of a life lived in service to people who'd never truly valued my generosity. Eleanor Patterson had helped me sort through everything, bringing the wisdom of someone who'd made her own transition from family caretaker to independent woman. "Keep the things that make you smile when you look at them," Eleanor had advised, holding up a ceramic vase I had made in a pottery class 20 years ago, but never displayed because James had once called it amateur. "Everything else is just taking up space you could use for new joy." The ceramic vase now sat on my kitchen windowsill, holding fresh sunflowers from the Lincoln Park Farmers Market. The first flowers I'd bought for myself in longer than I could remember. 3 weeks into my new life, I did something that would have been unthinkable in my old existence. I enrolled in an art class at the Chicago Cultural Center, watercolor painting on Tuesday mornings, taught by a gentle woman named Rosa, who treated her 72-year-old students with the same respect she showed the younger participants. "Art isn't about creating masterpieces," Rosa explained during my first class, guiding my hand as we worked on basic brush techniques. "It's about giving yourself permission to create something that didn't exist before you decided to make it. Permission to create." I had spent so many years focused on maintaining, supporting, and facilitating other people's creations that I'd forgotten I was capable of bringing something new into the world. My first painting was terrible, a shaky landscape that looked more like a child's finger painting than anything resembling the lakefront scene I'd attempted. But when I stepped back and looked at it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pride in something that was entirely my own. The art class led to other discoveries: coffee dates with Rosa after class, where we talked about books and travel and ideas that had nothing to do with family obligations; lunch invitations from other classmates who saw me as an interesting person worth getting to know, not just someone's mother or grandmother. I joined Eleanor's book club, diving into novels I'd always meant to read but never had time for. The monthly discussions were passionate and thoughtful, ranging from Jane Austen to contemporary fiction, from historical biographies to poetry collections that made me see language in new ways. I never realized how much I missed having opinions about things that don't involve other people's needs. I confessed to the book club one Thursday evening, as we discussed a novel about a woman rediscovering herself after divorce. "We lose ourselves gradually," said Diane, a retired teacher who'd joined the group after her husband passed away. "First, we're daughters trying to please our parents, then wives trying to support our husbands, then mothers trying to raise our children. Somewhere in all that trying, we forget we were people before we became roles." The conversation stayed with me as I walked home through Lincoln Park, past couples holding hands and families playing on playgrounds, past the life I used to think I wanted, but now recognized as a trap I'd mistaken for love. My phone had been silent for weeks. No emergency babysitting requests, no financial crises that only I could solve, no family drama that required my immediate intervention. The silence had been difficult at first. I'd conditioned myself to believe that being needed was the same as being loved, but gradually, the quiet had become peaceful rather than lonely. One Thursday afternoon in November, I was experimenting with a new bread recipe, something I'd seen in a cooking magazine and wanted to try simply because it looked interesting, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Emma standing in the hallway, no longer the confident child who'd ridden her bike to my house weeks ago, but a small girl who looked uncertain and a little scared. I opened my door immediately. "Emma? Sweetheart, how did you get here?" "I took the bus," Emma said, her 8-year-old voice trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I Googled your address and figured out which bus to take. I told Mommy I was going to Sarah's house after school." My heart clenched with worry and pride in equal measure. Worry for my granddaughter traveling alone through the city, and pride at the intelligence and determination it had taken to find me. "Does your mother know where you really are?" Emma shook her head, then burst into tears. "I miss you, Grandma. Everyone at home is sad and angry all the time, and nobody will tell me why we can't see you anymore. Daddy says you chose strangers over your family, but that doesn't make sense because you're not mean, and you've never chosen strangers over anything." I knelt down and pulled Emma into my arms, feeling the familiar surge of protective love that had nothing to do with manipulation or obligation, and everything to do with genuine affection. "Oh, sweetheart, I miss you too, more than you know." "Then why can't things go back to normal? Why can't we have Sunday dinners and movie nights and all the good stuff?" I led Emma to my living room, settling us both on the sofa that faced the lake. The afternoon light was golden and soft, creating the kind of atmosphere that made difficult conversations feel less harsh. "Emma, what do you know about respect? Like saying please and thank you? That's part of it. But it's bigger than that. Respect means treating someone like their feelings matter, like their choices are important, like they're a real person and not just someone who exists to do things for you." Emma nodded seriously, following the logic even if she didn't understand all the implications. "For a long time, some people in our family forgot to respect me. They forgot that I have feelings and needs and dreams, just like they do. They started treating me like I was only important when they needed something from me." "That's not fair," Emma said with the indignation of a child who instinctively understood justice. "No, it wasn't fair, so I had to make some changes to protect myself and show them that I deserve better treatment. But I always respected you, Grandma. And Michael does too. Why are we being punished for what the grown-ups did wrong?" The question pierced my heart because it contained a truth I'd been trying not to face. My choices had consequences for innocent people who didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of adult dysfunction. "You're not being punished, sweetheart. But sometimes when grown-ups make bad choices, it affects everyone around them, even people who didn't do anything wrong." We sat quietly for a moment, watching the lake traffic. A few late-season sailboats and the occasional water taxi carrying passengers between the harbors. "Grandma, can I ask you something that might be rude?" "You can ask me anything. Are you happier now?" The question was so direct, so perceptive, that I had to take a moment to consider my answer honestly. "Yes," I said finally, "I am happier. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I'm finally taking care of myself the way I always took care of everyone else." "Good," Emma said with the decisiveness of childhood. "I was worried that you were sad and lonely, but you seem, I don't know, like you're more you than you used to be." More you than you used to be. From the mouth of an 8-year-old came wisdom that adult family members had missed entirely. I called Claire to let her know where Emma was, a conversation that involved tears, threats, and accusations, but also a grudging admission that Emma was safe and would be driven home within the hour. Before we left, Emma looked around my new home with obvious approval. "I like it here, Grandma. It feels peaceful, and I like how you decorated it. It looks like you instead of looking like what you think other people want." That evening, after driving Emma home and enduring a tense conversation with Claire about inappropriate contact and undermining parental authority, I sat in my living room and tried to process the day's events. I missed my grandchildren terribly. I missed the innocent parts of family life that had nothing to do with the toxic dynamics I'd finally escaped. But I also understood that protecting myself had to take priority, even when that protection came at a cost. I picked up my phone and did something I'd been considering for weeks. I called David, the young delivery driver who'd shared tea and conversation with me that first week of freedom. "Margaret, is everything okay?" "I'm fine, David. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime." "Nothing romantic," I added quickly. "Just friendship. I realized I don't have many friends my own age, and I enjoyed talking with you." "I'd love that," David said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd be interested in volunteering at the community center I told you about. We're starting a mentorship program where seniors help younger people navigate life transitions. I thought you might be perfect for it. Mentorship. Helping others navigate life transitions. After decades of being taken advantage of, the idea of choosing to help people who would appreciate and respect my contribution felt like another step toward reclaiming my purpose on my own terms. I'd be very interested in that, I said. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of Lake Michigan's gentle waves against the shore, and for the first time in months, I dreamed about the future instead of grieving the past. I was not just surviving my liberation, I was thriving in it. 6 months later, I stood in the community center David had told me about, watching 23 women of various ages sit in a circle, sharing stories that could have been chapters from my own life. The second chapter support group had become my passion project, a weekly gathering for women who were learning to rebuild their lives after giving too much of themselves away. I spent 30 years making sure everyone else was happy, said Linda, a 58-year-old whose adult children had drained her retirement savings through a series of emergencies. I forgot I was allowed to be happy too. I nodded with the understanding of someone who'd walked the same path. These women came to me not because I had all the answers, but because I'd survived the questions that felt impossible to face. The hardest part, I said, sharing my own experience with the group, wasn't setting the boundaries. It was learning that I deserved to have boundaries at all. For decades, I believed that love meant never saying no, never putting myself first, never asking for anything in return. A younger woman named Ashley, recently divorced and struggling with her ex-husband's manipulation around custody, raised her hand tentatively. How do you know if you're being selfish or if you're being healthy? It was a question I heard often, the fear that had kept me trapped for so many years. Selfish people take from others to benefit themselves, I replied gently. Self-care means taking care of yourself so you can show up authentically for the people who truly matter. The difference is that one depletes others while the other replenishes you. After the group session, I walked along the lakefront path that had become my evening ritual. The spring air was crisp and filled with the promise of renewal, cherry blossoms forming clouds of pink along the shoreline. I'd been living in my new life for almost a year now, and the seasons had become markers of healing rather than just the passage of time. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Coffee tomorrow? I found a new gallery I want to show you. Real friendships, based on mutual interest and respect, still felt miraculous to me after so many years of transactional relationships. As I rounded the bend near Navy Pier, I saw a familiar small figure sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons from a bag of breadcrumbs. Emma, now 9 years old and somehow even more perceptive than before. How did you know I'd be here? I asked, settling beside my granddaughter. I remembered you said you walk here every evening. I've been coming here after school for 3 days, hoping to see you. Emma's voice carried a maturity that made my heart ache with pride and sadness. Mommy doesn't know I'm here. Emma, I know. I'm not supposed to come find you, but I had to tell you something important. I waited, understanding that Emma needed to say whatever had driven her to seek out these secret meetings. Michael and I are okay, Emma said seriously. I mean, home is still weird and sad, but we're okay. I wanted you to know that because I think you worry about us. It was true. I worried constantly about my grandchildren, caught between their parents' dysfunction and their own innocence. But I also wanted to tell you that you were right to leave, Emma continued, her 9-year-old voice carrying conviction that most adults never achieved. I understand now why you had to go. Daddy is mean to you the same way Tyler Morrison is mean to kids at school. He takes their lunch money and then acts like they should be grateful he didn't take more. The analogy was so accurate it took my breath away. I don't want to grow up thinking that's what love looks like, Emma said, throwing another handful of breadcrumbs to the pigeons. So I'm glad you showed me something different. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude for this wise child who understood concepts that eluded the adults around her. I love you, Emma. More than you'll ever know. I love you too, Grandma. And when I'm grown up and can make my own choices about who to spend time with, I'm going to choose you. Because you're the kind of person who chooses herself, and that's the kind of person I want to be. We sat together watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and rose, two generations of strong women learning to value themselves in a world that had taught them to disappear. A week later, I received a phone call that surprised me. Not from James or Claire, but from Mark, James's younger brother who'd witnessed the family confrontation months earlier. "Margaret, I owe you an apology," Mark said without preamble. "Jennifer and I have been talking about what happened last fall, and we realize we should have spoken up sooner. James's behavior was inexcusable, and we should have supported you instead of just sitting there." I appreciated the apology, though I no longer needed validation from James's family to know I'd made the right choice. "Jennifer wants to invite you to dinner next time you're in Minneapolis," Mark continued. "No agenda, no family drama, just dinner between people who respect each other." Respect. The word that had become my North Star. "I'd like that," I said honestly. That same week brought another unexpected contact. A call from Claire's mother, Patricia, who'd participated in the disastrous family intervention. "Margaret, I owe you an explanation," Patricia said, her voice carrying an unfamiliar humility. "I came to that meeting at your house because Claire asked me to help convince you to sell the house and move somewhere more manageable. She and James had been telling me you were becoming confused and making poor decisions." I listened without interrupting, curious about this delayed revelation. "But after seeing how they treated you that day, and after learning about James's financial improprieties, I realized I'd been misled. You weren't confused at all. You were finally thinking clearly." Patricia paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. "I wanted you to know that Claire is in therapy now. Individual therapy, not couples counseling. She's starting to understand how she enabled James's behavior toward you. It doesn't excuse anything, but I thought you should know that your actions had consequences beyond just protecting yourself. Consequences beyond protecting myself. I had never considered that my liberation might inspire others to examine their own relationships and choices." 3 weeks later, my life took another unexpected turn. I was at the farmer's market, selecting vegetables for a dinner party I was hosting for my book club, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Margaret? Margaret Henderson?" I turned to find Dr. Williams, my former supervisor from Mercy Hospital, looking older but still carrying the air of competent authority I remembered from my nursing days. "Margaret, I heard through the grapevine that you'd moved to the city. How are you enjoying retirement?" We chatted for a few minutes about my new life, my volunteer work, my art classes. Dr. Williams listened with the attention of someone genuinely interested in my answers. "I have a proposition for you," Dr. Williams said finally. "We're starting a new program at the hospital, peer counseling for family members dealing with financial elder abuse. We need someone who understands the dynamics from personal experience, someone who can help other families navigate these situations." I felt a familiar flutter of purpose, but this time it was different. This wasn't about sacrificing myself for others. It was about using my hard-won wisdom to help people in situations I understood intimately. It would be part-time, completely voluntary, and you'd have full control over your schedule and boundaries, Dr. Williams continued. "We need someone who knows how to help people find their own strength." I accepted immediately. On a warm evening in late May, exactly 1 year after I'd first stood up to James, I hosted my largest dinner party yet. My dining room table, a piece I'd chosen specifically for entertaining, was set for 8. Eleanor and Rosa from my art class, David and his girlfriend Sarah, Linda and Ashley from the support group, and Mark and Jennifer, visiting from Minneapolis. The conversation flowed across generations and backgrounds, touching on books and travel, art and social justice, dreams deferred and dreams being born. I moved between kitchen and dining room, serving food I'd prepared because I enjoyed cooking, not because anyone expected it of me. "This is lovely, Margaret," Jennifer said, gesturing toward the table set with my grandmother's china, but arranged in a way that felt celebratory rather than formal. "You can tell how much joy you put into it." Joy. Yes, that was exactly right. After my guests left, I sat on my balcony overlooking the lake, processing the fullness of my new life. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Happy 1-year anniversary of choosing yourself, Grandma. I'm proud of you." I had told Emma the date during one of our secret meetings. explaining it as the day I'd decided to value myself enough to demand better treatment. I scrolled through my photos from the evening, images of genuine laughter, meaningful conversation, and connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation. These were the relationships I'd thought were impossible. Deep, authentic, chosen. My old life felt like something that had happened to someone else, a story I could remember but no longer inhabited. I thought of the woman who'd stood in her kitchen that Sunday afternoon, listening to James dismiss her concerns while she scraped barely touched food into the garbage disposal. That woman had been disappearing piece by piece, year by year, until almost nothing authentic remained. This woman, the one sitting on a balcony she'd chosen, surrounded by evidence of a life she'd built deliberately, was someone I actually liked. Someone who had opinions and boundaries, interests and dreams, friends who valued her thoughts and sought her company. My reflection was interrupted by another text. This one from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Tyler Morrison from Emma's class. She told me you help people learn to respect themselves. My mom is going through some stuff with my dad, and I wondered if you could talk to her sometime." I smiled, understanding that my courage to choose myself had created ripples far beyond what I'd imagined. Children were learning new definitions of love and respect. Adults were questioning relationships they'd previously accepted as normal. My granddaughter was growing up with a model of self-worth that would serve her throughout her life. I typed back, "I'd be honored to talk with your mother. Have her call me anytime." As the moon rose over Lake Michigan, casting silver paths across the water that seemed to lead toward infinite possibilities, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete contentment with my own company. I'd learned the difference between being loved and being used. I'd discovered that respect was non-negotiable, and that kindness without boundaries was actually cruelty to myself. Most importantly, I'd proven that it was never too late to choose yourself. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you gave so much of yourself that you forgot who you were underneath all that giving? Do you know someone who might need to hear my story? If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you believe this message could help someone who's struggling to find their own worth, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the stories we need to hear most are the ones that remind us we deserve better. My story isn't just about one woman's liberation. It's about the courage we all need to choose ourselves, even when that choice comes at a cost. Because in the end, the price of staying small is always higher than the price of becoming who we're meant to be.